Let us light up the darkness. It's AT Daily. Okay. We are holding by page 56. We are rapidly approaching the end of the first volume of the Talmud, Berachos. I believe it's 63 pages. We are on page 56. And we are in the midst of an extended sage discourse, Talmudic discourse on dreams. We are fascinated. I'm fascinated. I hope you're fascinated with me. Recall that we opened Berachos with a discussion of how and when we pray. We eventually moved into the blessings themselves, particularly for foods that we eat and for mitzvahs that we perform, commandments that we fulfill. And now in this final chapter of Berachos, chapter 9, the chapter is about blessings that we say on particular occasions when we see something unusual. And we say a blessing to remind us that God made the world, God runs the world, God sent us into the world with everything that we need in order to fulfill our mission here. And as part of that discussion, we had several lists of things that are good and what they mean, and things that we have to pray for. And particularly, there are three good things that require special mercy, right? It's a special gift from the Lord when we have a good king, a good year, and a good dream, right? So it's a great value in having a good dream. And then that discussion opened into what do dreams mean? And that's where we are. And our sages are going to spend 3 entire pages, 3 dafs, pages 55, 56, and 57 of Berachos, discussing the meaning of dreams, stories that turn on the meaning of dreams. And that's where we are now. And the sort of overarching question that I want us to be asking ourselves is, our sages, who are often very terse, recall that the oral law was never intended to be written down. Eventually it was written down, and the Talmud became a written document because there was so much Roman persecution and persecution of Jews across the world, particularly of our leaders, of our sages. And our sages were concerned that the oral law might be forgotten from Israel if it was not written down, because the sages would not survive to pass it on, to teach it. I mention this because of this idea of, if it was going to be passed down orally, it was almost like a code. Many of the teachings are mnemonics, right? They're meant to be memorized. And so if you want people to memorize, I mean, you see my whole, right? That's that whole Talmud there. And the art scroll is even more volumes, right? So if you're going to have people memorize all of that wisdom, all of that knowledge, you're only going to give them very important teachings in a way that can be remembered, almost a little bit like a code of mnemonics, so that when they remember it, then they can teach it and expand on it. It's because the teaching really happens, and this is still true, even though it's written in books. The learning of Talmud really happens like this, right? You and I are learning together. You can put questions in the comments. That opens it up. Questions and comments are very important. I will, at the end of every class, you've seen me, if you've been with us regularly, I try to look at comments, and in reaction, in response to your comments and questions, new things happen, right, that wouldn't have happened if I was just teaching frontally, as it were. So, if the teaching is dense and meant to be memorized, and only the most important stuff sort of gets encoded into it, why? This is the question I'm asking you to think about as we go through this. Yesterday, today, tomorrow, pages 55, 56, 57. Why are the sages spending so much time on the meaning and interpretation of dreams? Okay, let us begin. We open our discussion of page 56. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani says that dreams reflect the thoughts of our heart. His proof for that is that dreams aren't crazy. They're always, we connect with them. People don't wake up and say, well, that dream had nothing to do with me, right? They are meaningful to us. They're inherently personally meaningful to us. And his proof is that people in a dream are not shown a golden palm tree or an elephant passing through the eye of a needle. In other words, it's not like when sometimes you go to a museum of modern art and you see just crazy stuff in juxtaposition of stuff, and, images and objects next to each other. And you're like, I don't know what that means. It means nothing to me. If you're an art student, you understand art. Of course, it can mean something to you. I'm not denigrating art in any way. But what he's saying is that the dreams that we experience always have personal connection to us. Why? According to Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani, because stuff that comes into our dreams, the seed of it is born in our own hearts, right? It's stuff that comes out of our soul, out of our inner imagination, out of our emotional imagination. And as a kind of further proof that dreams are connected to our waking lives, we have two stories very similar. Recall that the Jewish world at the time that the Mishnah is being set down, the early part of the first millennium in the Common Era, the Jewish world is essentially split between the Jews who live in Israel and the Holy Land and are under Roman dominion, and the Jews that live to the east, in Babylonia, mostly in Babylonia, which is modern day Iraq, but which is ruled by most of this period Persia, right, which is modern day Iran. Okay, so Persia has dominion over Babylonia, and so the king of Persia, in many respects, is the king of the world. The king of the Eastern world, right? The Roman emperor. Eventually, Rome diminishes in importance. By 476, the basic Roman Empire falls, although, of course, the Eastern Roman Empire stays standing for another 1,000 years. At any rate, in this period, Rabbi Yehoshua, he was living and teaching in Israel and travels to Rome. He's a very important sage who has dealings not only with Jewish politics and Jewish authority, but even with the Roman emperor himself. And the emperor says to Rabbi Yehoshua, well, you Jews say you're wise. Tell me what I'm going to dream tonight. And this is an important sort of test because, if Rabbi Yehoshua can't give the emperor what he wants, like the Jews are going to be diminished in importance in the kingdom. And, we're guests in any other empire and always a little bit in danger. And, our leaders have to do a good job of staying in good graces with the ruling authority. But interesting, Rabbi Yehoshua's approach to this is he says to the emperor, who he knows pretty well, so he had a sense of how this would fall on the emperor's ears, and he says, well, in your dream, you're going to see that Persians are going to enslave you and force you to herd unclean animals with a golden staff. It's a very rich, very visual image on a matter that's very frightening to the Roman emperor, right? He's his biggest enemy. This is like the Cold War, right? Between what the Cold War was between the United States and the Soviet Union is what it was in this period between the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire. So this gives the Roman emperor quite a bit of fear. He dwells on it all day long, thinks about nothing else except this image that Rabbi Yehoshua has given him. And sure enough, that night, that's what he dreams about. Right? So whether this was a gift from God to protect the Jewish people, that God sort of puts Rabbi Yehoshua's image into the Roman emperor's head deep enough that he dreams about it that night, or if it's just a very human thing that which we're most worried about and which we can picture tends to appear in our dream. Similar story, Shmuel, the sage, is got a good relationship with King Shapur, the king of Persia, puts the same question to him. You Jews say you're wise. Tell me what I'm going to dream tonight. And Shmuel says to him, you'll dream that Romans are going to capture you and force you to grind date pits in mills of gold. Very, very similar approach. Puts a very visual, easy, what's the word I'm looking for? Very pictorial, right? A very not an easy to imagine image, but one that summons imagery into the mind, and which is scary because the Persian king is afraid of a war and had several wars, some successful, some not, with Rome. He thinks about it all day, and that night he dreams about it. So these two stories together seem to imply that, well, maybe dreams are not so meaningful. Maybe dreams are just a reflection of that which we're worried about, that which we dwell on during our waking lives. If people are so suggestible that you can give them something to worry about and then they're going to dream about it, well, what meaning really do dreams have? Remember that what we said yesterday, and who was it that gave us that teaching? It's so important. Was it Rabbi Hista? I believe it was, that a dream not interpreted is like a letter not read, right? So there, and that really is the more underlying philosophy of all this discussion of dreams, is that dreams do bring a message from heaven for us, but we're not going to get that message unless we get in there and mix it up with the dream, try to understand it, and get an interpretation going. And what we learned yesterday from Rabbi Bena'a, right, that all dreams follow the mouth, meaning probably that the interpretation of the dream in the morning, when you remember, a dream that you remember is an important dream, and then you get it interpreted, whether you do it yourself or go to an interpreter, and it's that interpretation which is going to have a very strong impact on your life. So, are dreams just suggestible things that really don't have anything, that are not a message from heaven, or are they a message from heaven? And of course the answer is they can be both, because every dream, as we also learned yesterday, contains an astonishing amount of nonsense. Not so much nonsense as stuff that's not going to come true, stuff that isn't necessarily related to the message from heaven. And so you can see that a dream carries with it a mix of that letter from heaven that is an important message for us to pay attention to and that may have an impact on our lives, and all the stuff that we bring to it. And that's not really that surprising when you think about it. Our lives are that way, right? There are principles that we want to live by, that we aspire to live by, and there's the stuff of regular life that we do just because it's our desires pull us that way or circumstances pull us that way. It's going to be a mix of both those things. And so this brings us to, back where I was. Yes, so now we're going to have a long story. It takes almost a full side of this page, 56a. And this is the story of Rava and Abaye, who are two great contemporary sages. Excuse me. And they study together a lot. They certainly study similar topics. And so they study so hard and so intensely, and often the same verses, that these verses come up in their brain, come up in their dreams. Or maybe it's a message sent from heaven. But for whatever reason, they have many times the same dream. And they go to the same dream interpreter, a fellow named Bar Hedaya. Now, Bar Hedaya, we're not going to say he's a phony. This is two great sages who go to him to have their dreams interpreted. Probably there's quite a bit of good, well done, well executed interpretation done by Bar Hedaya. But Bar Hedaya likes to get a fee for giving people an interpretation of his dreams. Abaye is perfectly happy to pay the fee. Rava, it's not explained why, but perhaps Rava thinks, this is a holy matter, he's a great sage. For whatever reason, he doesn't think that Bar Hedaya, that he, Rava, should give money to Bar Hedaya to get his dream interpreted. So Abaye pays for the interpretation and Rava does not pay. They have the same dream, they go to the same interpreter, one pays, the other does not pay. Bar Hedaya does not like to be asked to give dream interpretations and not be paid. He resents it. And so we have a pattern that he gives, for the very same dream, he gives Abaye a very positive interpretation, and for Rava, a very negative interpretation. Now, Rava was not familiar with this idea that we learned yesterday. We learned it yesterday in the Talmud, but it was not around for Rava to know about it. Maybe it was a piece of knowledge that was distilled later, or simply in another place. But Rava had not heard the teaching that all dreams follow the mouth, right? That the interpretation of the dream is what really has the impact on someone's life. Rava believes that there's intrinsic information, it's an intrinsic message in the dream, and it's in there or it isn't, right? And a good dream interpreter is somebody who, can get that information out of the dream and give it to you. And perhaps he also holds by that teaching that we learned yesterday that a bad dream is better than a good dream because it leads one to examine their deeds. So for whatever reason, we have a situation, they go to the same guy with the same dream, Abaye pays, Rava doesn't, and they get very different interpretations. A few examples. The first 6 examples, they in their dream, both Abaye and Rava are shown or hear a verse from the Torah, specifically verses of curses, right? So in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses says to the Jewish people, if you follow the law, many great things are going to happen to you. But if you disobey the law, many terrible things are going to happen to you. And in fact, all those curses that Moses spoke to the Jewish people eventually, over time, happened, right? The Jewish people eventually abandoned the Torah in ancient Israel. They had wicked kings who practiced idolatry and all kinds of things went bad. And Jews, were forced to suffer the destruction of the first temple and eventually the second temple, a destruction which we are still mourning, right? And when those destructions happened, the Jews were really abused by their enemies, and all these curses that Moses spoke eventually came to be. At this point, when these guys are learning, the temple has already fallen, and these curses now, they're not national curses, they're just, they've happened already. Most of them have already happened, but there's still verses in the Torah that we study. And what did they mean historically? What could they mean in the future? And what other, there's many other teachings that come from every verse in the Torah has, unlimited number of teachings that can come from it. At any rate, in their dreams, they both heard, your ox shall be slain and you will not eat of it, right? So that's one of the verses in Deuteronomy. Abaye, who gave Bar Hidayah money for the interpretation, was told, you will sell your business, right? Your ox shall be slain, means you shall sell your business. And you will not eat of it means that you will be unable to eat because you will have so much joy. Isn't this great? You will make such a big profit from selling your business that you won't be able to contain yourself. You just you won't be hungry. You'll be so busy celebrating. But to Rava, he says, you will lose your business and your appetite, right? You will lose everything and you'll be so depressed you won't be able to eat. Another night, they get the same verse in their dreams. You shall beget sons and daughters and they shall go into captivity. Abaye, who gives the fee, says, you will have numerous kids and they will marry and they will move into other towns, and so that it'll be like, for you, it'll be like they're in captivity because they're not living in your house anymore. But of course, it's a great joy that your sons, your sons and daughters grow to adulthood, get married, and go and have children, and make their own families. But to Rava, Bar Hidayah interprets literally, right? You will beget sons and daughters, and they will be forced into captivity. Similar verse, both having a dream. Your sons and daughters will be given to other people. Abaye is told, you'll have numerous kids, and the relatives of your wife's family will say, come, we want your kids. They're such beautiful, honorable kids. We want them to marry, our extended family, our extended relatives and acquaintances. And so it's a very positive prophecy for Abaye. Rava is told, your wife will die and your kids will be raised by another woman. Heavy. Another example, they both see the verse, you will carry much seed to the field, but the locusts will consume it, like what's going on in Africa right now. Abaye is given an interpretation consistent with the beginning of the verse. You will carry great seed into the field. You will have farm fields and they will be plentiful. And Rav is given interpretation from the end of the verse, that whatever you grow will be consumed and you won't have profit from it. More examples like that, another couple of verses. Then, instead of bringing verses to Bar Hedaya, Rava and Abaye bring images that they've both seen in their dreams. They both saw the same image. There's going to be 6 more examples of that. For example, we saw a barrel fall into a pit. So Abaye is told, your merchandise will be in great demand. Rava is told, your merchandise will be ruined, right? Eventually, and then the last of those examples this is the 12th example. I'm not doing all of them for you, but the 12th example of something they have a common dream, in this case a common image, is that they both see a donkey braying near their head. So Abaye is told, you will be a king, meaning, these are Torah scholars, they're sages, you will be the head of a yeshiva. And in fact, that prophecy came true. And Rava is told there's a problem with your tefillin, that the scrolls in your tefillin are faulty. And Rava says, I checked my tefillin, I'm sure it's okay. And he says, no, your tefillin is faulty. You need to go check it, that's what's wrong with you. It's not revealed whether it turned out that there was a problem in the tefillin, but I suspect there must have been, which would actually be a help to Rava, because then there's 4 more examples where Rava goes to Bar Hedaya on his own. Now no longer just the same dream as Abaye, but Rava keeps going to Bar Hedaya and just shares images with him. He says, in my dream I saw that the door of my house fell. Bar Hedaya says, that means your wife is going to die. He says, in a dream I saw my front and back teeth fall out. I've had that dream of teeth falling out. It's a horrifically frightening dream. Bar Hedaya tells Rava, that means your kids are going to die. Rava says, I had a dream and I saw 2 doves flying. Bar Hedaya says you're going to have 2 divorces. You're going to divorce 2 women, presumably after your wife dies. And another time, Rava says, I saw 2 turnip heads in my dream. And Bar Hedaya says to him, you're going to suffer 2 blows to your head. 2 people are going to punch you in the face. And it happened. Right? He actually went to the study hall that day and a fight broke out, had nothing to do with him, but in the melee, Rava ended up getting hit twice in the head. So after these 17 examples of negative interpretations that Rava receives from Bar Hedaya for verses that he heard or images that he saw in his dream, finally Rava decides to pay Bar Hedaya for his services. I guess because it came true, right? The 2 blows happened. I think his wife is still alive, but that one came true. And perhaps the tefillin was also found to be faulty. So then he paid. Now that he paid, all of a sudden, his dreams are producing beautifully positive interpretations. He goes to Bar Hedaya and he says, I saw a wall fall at my house. Bar Hedaya says, oh, you will acquire property without limits. He goes back, he says, in my dream I saw that Abaye's house fell. And Bar Hedaya says, that means that Abaye is going to die and you will inherit his yeshiva. You will be the head of the yeshiva that Abaye was formerly the head of. And that happened. Another example is he says, I saw that Rava goes to Bar Hedaya and says, I saw my house fall and people came, and after the house collapsed, they were taking bricks away from the location where my house collapsed. And Bar Hedaya says, oh, that's wonderful. That means that your Torah teachings will be disseminated far and wide. And the last example, now we're at, 23 examples that we've been given. And finally, Rava goes to Bar Hedaya and he says that in my dream, I heard the Egyptian Hallel. So it's a sequence of psalms that are celebrated at some point, celebrating God for in thanksgiving for things. And Bar Hedaya says, this means that miracles are going to be performed for you. At this point, it turns out coincidentally that Bar Hedaya and Rava were traveling to the same place. And they were going to go on a ship together. And Bar Hedaya, he actually believes very much in the interpretations that he gives people. He just goes negative right, when they're not paying him. Perhaps he's just ill-disposed toward them, and then the vision that he gets of what the dreams mean becomes negative. For whatever reason, now they're going on a ship together, and Bar Hedaya says to himself, well, he's just received a message from heaven, right, in his dream that miracles are going to be performed for him. I shouldn't go on a ship with this guy because perhaps the miracle will be that the ship will sink and he'll be the sole survivor. I don't want to be on a ship with him. So Bar Hedaya changes his mind. He says, yeah, I'm not going today. And he's climbing down off the ship and he stumbles a little bit and a book falls out of his pocket, basically. And a book back then is not a codex. It's not a book, like our books. I would presume it means a scroll. Because I think at that time, Forum, books were scrolls. I'm not sure about that, but I'm pretty sure. At any rate, a book, it's called a book, drops out of his pocket, and Rava looks into this book of Bar Hedaya's, and in the book he sees all dreams follow the mouth. And you can imagine it's almost like when we were watching that movie, The Sixth Sense, right? Then there's a big twist near the end. And Rava all of a sudden goes, whoa! And he thinks back of all these years and all the dreams that he's brought to Bar Hedaya and all the negative interpretations that he got and how they suddenly all went positive after he started paying him. And he realizes that it was in Bar Hedaya's control to give good or bad interpretations. Regarding the fact that Abaye was always getting good interpretations, it's unclear, but several sages comment that they didn't know what each other's interpretations was. He didn't know that Abaye was getting such positive feedback on the same dreams where he was getting negative. At any rate, he has that moment of insight. It's like, oh man, he's been giving me these terribly negative things all this time, and it could have been positive. And he says, maybe you were being sincere. I don't think so. I will forgive you for all the interpretations you gave me, except that you said that my wife is going to die. For that I will not forgive you. And he's so angry at Bar Hedaya, Rava is so angry that he curses Bar Hedaya. And he says, I curse you that you will end up in another kingdom where they have no compassion for you. Now, the curse of a sage, Bar Hedaya actually teaches us this here. The curse of a sage is a terrible thing to have directed at you. Even if the sage is wrong to curse you, if he curses you, you're cursed in some way. You never want to have a sage get mad at you. We learn that a little bit from the story of Jacob when he's fleeing Laban, his brother-in-law Laban, or is it his father-in-law? It's the father of his wives, Rachel and Leah. And he's fleeing, and Rachel, for whatever reason, takes some idols from her father's house, perhaps so that, he won't be under the influence of those idols now that she understands, that God runs the world because she's married to Jacob. At any rate, she takes some idols from her father's house. Laban comes after them, pursues them, says, why did you leave in the middle of the night? What were you thinking? You people left, and not only that, you stole stuff from my house. And Jacob's like, what are you talking about, stole from your house? He says, yes, somebody took idols from my house. And Jacob says, nobody took anything from your house, especially not idols. And if such a person is here who took idols from your house, that person will die. Let that person die, right? Now, he didn't know that his beloved Rachel, he's got 2 wives and 2 concubines, but for sure the one he loves the most is Rachel. And he didn't know he was cursing Rachel when he said that, but he said that, and it would be Rachel who dies first of those women, and tragically young. She gives birth to Joseph and to Benjamin, and she dies giving birth to Benjamin. So Joseph, hardly ever knows his mother. She died when he was so young, and Benjamin, of course, didn't know her. The curse of a sage is a big thing. Bar Hedaya now is very worried that he's been cursed by Rava. He says, what shall I do? And he thinks about it. He says, well, I'll go into exile because exile atones. In other words, he knows he's done something wrong. by Rava. And he says, I need to atone for my sin. I'm going to get as far away as I can. And perhaps that will be an atonement for my sins. He ends up in Rome. I mean, you should have thought that through a little bit, right? The curse was you should end up in a kingdom that has no compassion for you. And he goes to the heart of such a kingdom. But at that time, relations with Rome were pretty good. Still, he goes to Rome, and he ends up, hanging out in a place where the keeper of the emperor's wardrobe is also hanging out. And this guy hears that Bar Hedaya is an interpreter of dreams. So he says to Bar Hedaya, oh, I dreamt that a needle pricked my finger. And Bar Hedaya says, give me a zuz. It's a coin, a pretty valuable coin. Give me a zuz, not a huge coin. I would imagine today's money, a zuz would be like $10, $20, something like that. So he says, give me a zuz and I'll interpret your dream. The guy doesn't want to give a zuz. Fine. The next day, the keeper of the wardrobe says, I had another dream and a worm slipped between my fingers. Bar Hedaya says, give me a zuz. I'll interpret your dream for you. The guy doesn't want to give a zuz. The next day, I had a dream that a worm fell on my whole hand, like a big worm covered my whole hand. Bar Hedaya doesn't even pause. He says, well, I'll tell you what that means. For nothing. That means that worms have destroyed the silk wardrobe of the emperor. And the keeper says, what? And he goes running, like the emperor has, huge closets. I guess the keeper of the wardrobe, who's dressing the emperor every day, didn't even realize that there's a whole part of the wardrobe where all the most important silk clothing is kept. And it's been ruined because these worms got into it, holes all over these very valuable garments. They bring this guy before the emperor. The emperor says, execute him. The guy, as he's about to be executed, says, well, wait a minute. There was somebody who knew. He knew that this is what was going on, and he wanted a zuz in order to reveal it. And okay, I didn't pay him, but if he had revealed it, so then all the clothes would have been saved. And they bring Bar Hedaya before the emperor and says, is it true that you allowed the emperor's wardrobe to be ruined for the value of one zuz? Off with his head. And not just off with his head. Bar Hedaya's demise is graphic and horrific. They basically they bend with like big machines. They bend two palm trees together. They tie him to each end of the palm trees, and then they release the palm trees. They spring up like big trees, and his body is torn in two. That's the end of Bar Hedaya. Now, this is a long story that we've just told with so many examples given. Like, we didn't need, 23 examples of these dreams being interpreted that they could go good or ill. Why did our sages spend so much time communicating this entire story to us, right? It shows how important it is that dreams are fluid, unusual, tricky, poetic things, right? And that they definitely contain important messages. We saw that certain dreams come true and in a big way, and that the interpretation will affect our behavior. And I think that just the page space, right? The amount of space that they're gonna spend in the Talmud on these dreams is to tell us how important dreams are and how we need to investigate them and be in contact with them and ask what they mean. And, right, that if we're asked to interpret somebody else's dream or our own, of course we want to look into that dream for positive messages, for positive behavior that we can take, for things that are going to help us, right? Okay. Okay, after that story, so we get into page 56b, the back side of this page. Now we're given a bunch of examples. These will also continue tomorrow on page 57. But now we're given a bunch of examples of images, right? The latter part of the examples in the Abaye and Rava story, they went from hearing verses in their dreams to seeing certain images in their dreams. Bar Hadai was able to give interpretations of that, and now our sages are going to continue to tell us what certain images mean, right? And it's sort of like you can see that now that they've established how important dreams are, how important the interpretation of dreams is, the sages want to give us tools for understanding what these images mean. And so they do it in two different ways. One is when we see ambiguous images, images that could go either way, we want to make sure they go positive. So one way to do that is you see a certain image in your dream. When you wake up, you recite a Bible verse that's very positive, and that will give you confidence that that image was there for a positive reason. For example, you see a shofar in your dream. Okay, there's two shofar up. This is a Yemenite shofar, and at the time that we're talking about, they probably didn't see too many shofars like this. They saw a lot more shofars like this, an actual ram's horn, right? Shofar most often associated with Rosh Hashanah, right? And the month before Rosh Hashanah, when we blow it every day, and it's a big wake-up call to us. Now, our sages say that if you see a shofar in your dream, when you wake up, you should recite a verse from the Bible that has the shofar in it. But not just any verse, right? Not just you shall sound the shofar when it's the new year, but something even more positive. So they look to a verse from Isaiah 52:7, where it says, "The great shofar shall be sounded." And when Isaiah is talking about that, he's talking about the day of the great redemption, right? The Messianic age, when all the exiles will be, everyone will hear a shofar around the world. The Messiah has come, and all the Jews dispersed all over the world will be brought back to the Holy Land. That's a positive image. And so you recite that verse when you wake up if you've seen a shofar in your dream. And likewise, if you see a dog in your dream, grapes in your dream, someone shaving in your dream, a reed, or an ox, then you can wake up. And recite a verse, right? When you do, and that'll help you take a positive interpretation from that image in your dream. Then they go on, okay, it's not always that, there's going to be a verse for it. In fact, some images in the dream just have a meaning in themselves. And so the sages give 5 examples. Now, the fact that, you see an ox, you can recite a verse that's very positive and turn it into something positive. But then they also say you see an ox and there's some inherent meanings to the ox. I'll just read this. The sages taught 5 matters are said about dreams with regard to the ox. One who dreams that he ate from its flesh, like you have a hamburger, will become wealthy, right? If you dream that you're eating a steak or a hamburger in your dream, you're eating a steak or a hamburger, it means you will become wealthy. One who dreams that an ox gored him, that sounds terrible. In my dream, the horns of an ox pierced me, and I thought I was going to die. But actually, that means that you will have sons who are Torah scholars. So for the sages, nothing could be better. And why? Because Torah scholars gore each other in an attempt to understand the Torah, right? Sages will argue with each other what it means, sometimes very passionately, as we saw in the debates between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, but they do it for the purpose of understanding God's will in Scripture and throughout the world. One who dreams that an ox bit him, that's bad. Suffering is coming to him. One who dreams that the ox kicked him will be required to travel a great distance in the future. One who dreams that he was riding an ox, it is a sign that he will rise to greatness. Now, we also have a whole bunch of people who brought their dreams. I'm not going to go into all of them. This show's already been long enough. But a bunch of people brought dreams to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. And he also demonstrates great creativity. As we saw, Bar Hidayah, who was skilled at interpreting dreams, he just, let his emotions get involved with that and still produced effective interpretations. But he could go positive or negative on the same image, right? So when you're looking for an interpretation of your dream, ask for help with that. Pray for a little, God, show me what this means. Do I need to improve myself? Is there something I need to do? Is something that, something important, something good? The point is you can work with the dream and you can actually ask for God to strengthen your creativity so that you can understand something that was apparently very negative, in fact, could be very positive. As we see here, if in your dream an ox is, what do you call it? The horns of the ox, pierce you, and you would think, oh God, that's terrible. It means I'm going to die. No, it means you're going to have sons who are going to gore each other with their Torah arguments, their passionate Torah arguments. Some more images. One who sees a donkey in a dream should anticipate salvation. As it is said, behold, your king comes to you, and he is triumphant and victorious, lowly, and riding upon a donkey. That's from Zechariah. One who sees a cat in a dream, in a place, one who sees a cat in a dream, in a place where in Aramaic they call it shunra, a nice song will be composed for him. And that's a bit of a play on words. Grapes in a dream is a good sign. Black grapes in their season is a good omen. Black grapes, when not in their season, is a bad omen. One who sees a white horse in a dream, regardless of whether the horse was walking or running, it is a good omen for him. One who sees a red horse walking in his dream, it is a good omen. If the red horse is running, it is a bad omen. And I actually... And there's many more examples like that. It's just too many examples to share them all in our crucial highlights type of class. I don't do the whole page. But reviewing this page, I actually looked at my Art Scroll Talmud, and I took notes on it when I was reading it the first time I took a journey through the entire Talmud between 2005 and 2012, right? So 2005 is 15 years ago, right? And I looked at my notes that I took on this page then, and what I was really struck by was, if you read this carefully, you study it carefully, what happens? Like, you get so many, images in your mind and meanings in your mind. It sort of creates image systems. And one who studies this and cares and is in touch with his dreams or her dreams, you can become a better interpreter of dreams. You'll have a more supple vocabulary for interpreting dreams. And you will have sort of more images running through your head, sort of image systems available to you when you dream, right? As we learn at the beginning of this page, that it was Shmuel Bar Nachmani says that what we see in our dreams is related to what happens in our waking lives. And the letter from heaven that is included in every dream is subtle and difficult to pry out. And so much of what surrounds it is the stuff from our lives, right? And we need to be able to separate, the wheat from the chaff, separate that message from heaven from, the huge bundle of images that comes in our dream just from our waking lives. At any rate, I think our takeaway from this is that dreams are not meaningless stuff. Dreams are not unimportant. A dream not interpreted is like a letter not read, right? A person who is in touch with his or her dreams is a person who is already elevating in spirituality. The more we care about our dreams, right, the more we're going to get messages from heaven. And what messages from heaven are we going to get? I mean, they're going to be messages that actually come from heaven. Of course, they're going to be consistent with Torah. So we're going to be not just following the law with our bodies every day, which is so important, but also rising, our souls rising toward heaven and having more of a relationship with the law, with the source of the law, with the source of Torah, with God, right? Through the mitzvahs during the day, we come closer to God, and through our dreams at night, we come closer to God. And as we, use our Torah knowledge to connect with our dreams, we start to integrate ourselves as people who are both physical and spiritual working together, right? Our soul and our body working together to fulfill God's will in this world. Okay, let me see if there's some comments that I should be addressing. I see there's some kind of an argument going on. That is not for me. You guys can argue amongst yourselves. The question is, does anyone have a question for me? Somebody says, may I know what the meaning of accidental is? I think that is a question about why am I called Accidental Talmudist? At this point, I will certainly say there are no accidents. If you want to know my story, how I became the Accidental Talmudist, you can see that on our website at accidentaltalmudist.org. It's a long story. It's a beautiful story. It's something that really happened to me, a little miracle that was performed for me. And I never would have expected to sit here teaching, a worldwide audience about Talmud, and would never be doing this, except that God happened to put book 1 of the Talmud, the one we're reading now, in my hands. I happened to buy it on day 1 of the Daf Yomi cycle, not this year, 2020, but in March of 2005. And that's why I ended up taking the Daf Yomi journey, and it changed my life. And now I'm teaching it this time around, and it's changing my life again. And we've been getting enough messages from people taking the journey with us that this wisdom and this knowledge changes lives. So that's all I can see right now in these messages. Let me know. No arguments, just misinterpretation. Shannon says, okay, great. And you can argue, it's great. But, arguments for the sake of knowledge, arguments for the sake of truth, arguments for the sake of helping other people, beautiful arguments. Arguments based on sarcasm and putting down others and building ourselves up by putting down others, we don't believe in that. We don't want that here. So I don't know what the argument was, but I hope it wasn't that kind of argument, and rather was the former kind of truth-driven, passionate argument. My pals, it's great to be with you. With God's help, I'll be on a plane tonight to Washington for APAC, and should be broadcasting our class on page 57 of Berachos tomorrow from the nation's capital. For today, sending you lots of love from LA.